0 points in the second half, just 2 shots taken in the second half, 11 points, 9 assists. The final game of the season.
Everybody expected Houston James Harden, but that's not who he is anymore.
I don't worry about my job, Howard. I think I do a terrific job, and if you don't, then you should write it.
I want to open up this video by apologizing to you guys. I'm typically known for my ability to deliver these post-game analysis videos relatively quickly, sometimes within minutes of the game ending. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that this year because, unfortunately, I was mourning the passing of a loved one that recently passed away a few days ago. But my nights have primarily been consumed with mourning with my family, and as a result, I haven't been able to fulfill my obligation to you guys. But in this instance, last night we had one of the most bizarre endings to a team's regular season since, well, the last time the Philadelphia 76ers got eliminated from the Eastern Conference semifinals. I mean, think about it. In one night, you had Doc Rivers blowing up at reporters in frustration, Jimmy Butler throwing shade at the Philadelphia 76ers for signing Tobias Harris over him, and Joel Embiid essentially calling his new co-star washed. And that's before we even get to how Ben Simmons reacted to this entire situation. So before we get to the content, make sure you drop a like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Check out our Discord community if you want to tell me to my face that the Los Angeles Lakers stink. And now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Now that the NBA playoffs are in full swing, every single dollar counts, especially if you want to use that money towards a parlay, which is why I partnered with Albert to save as much of my money as I possibly could. You see, the difference between Albert and a traditional bank is Albert doesn't charge overdraft fees. They won't charge you a fee for having a checking and savings account. And they even give cash back on debit card purchases. And they'll even work behind the scenes to make sure you save, instead of opening a traditional savings account and hoping that you would remember to put money into it, which I definitely don't. Albert looks at your income and expenses and sees what type of money you could save. And they'll move some of that money into your savings account little by little without you even noticing, really. It's kind of like that feeling where you find money in your pocket that you didn't know was there. That's pretty much what it's like to have an Albert account. And let's say you're bad at managing your money like I am. Well, Albert has a feature that they call Genius, which is a team of financial experts that will look at your situation and answer any of your questions in the event that you get stuck. And they're so confident that you're going to like the app that they're willing to give you $150 when you use my link in the description down below, albert.com/TFM, open a checking account and connect a qualifying direct deposit. You have nothing to lose, man. It takes like 5 minutes to create an account with my link in the description down below. And once you do it and open a checking account and link a qualifying direct deposit, they'll give you $150. That's albert.com/TFM. And thank you, Albert, for the sponsorship.
When I first got here, no one picked us to be anywhere.
I know this is going to sound bizarre, but Doc Rivers actually makes a reasonable point here. Although in typical Doc Rivers fashion, I don't believe he did a good job explaining his point. The Philadelphia 76ers have not changed since the hiring of Doc Rivers. As a matter of fact, the 76ers were considered to be a championship contender during the Brett Brown era as well. But the philosophy of the Philadelphia 76ers at the time was either this team stagnated or this team took a major step back. And Jimmy Butler played a huge hand at that. I don't know if you guys remember, but the 2019 Philadelphia 76ers boasted a lineup of JJ Redick, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler, and Joel Embiid. One could assume that this team was talented enough to win a championship. And if it wasn't for this absolutely soul-crushing play by Kawhi Leonard, then the 76ers would possibly be a completely different team today. Jimmy Butler may have ended up being a 76er still. Brett Brown may still have a job with the 76ers, and who knows where Doc Rivers would be. If you guys remember, following this game, Joel Embiid had a famous moment where he was shown crying. To this day, that moment has been memed over and over again, but to be honest, I can't really blame him for crying in this moment, because the reason why he cried in this moment is he would never get that stacked of a team ever again in his career. Now, obviously, Joel Embiid still has a lot of basketball to play, and hopefully he stays healthy enough to play a lot more years and have way more contending teams built around him, but it's still something that people people tend to forget. Embiid has never been placed in a situation where he had this perfect of a team built around him. A team with an incredible wing defender in Ben Simmons, one of the best shooters in the game with JJ Redick, a scorer that can be depended on in Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. This team played underneath Brett Brown, and they were expected to win a championship, especially after the 76ers traded for Jimmy Butler. Despite an incredibly promising season from this core, that offseason Jimmy Butler would decide to sign with the Miami Heat in a deal that shocked 76ers fans. At the time, the widespread belief was that the 76ers pursued Jimmy Butler heavily, but Butler wanted to play for the Miami Heat instead. At least according to Jimmy Butler, this wasn't necessarily the case, as after the game last night, he said this.
Tobias Harris over me?
And then he even said that he wished that he was still on Joel Embiid's team.
You wanted to win this one so you can have something over Joel Embiid. You just spoke to him. What was that message to him?
I still wish I was on his team.
Following Butler's departure, the 76ers opted to build around the core of Embiid, Harris, and Simmons. But they kind of panicked and decided to sign Al Horford to one of the worst contracts in NBA history, which would result in them getting swept by the Boston Celtics the season after. It's kind of ironic because they signed Al Horford away from the Boston Celtics to weaken the Boston Celtics, but I digress. Brett Brown would be fired after this, and the Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey era would begin. Now at this point, I'm sure you guys are caught up because the 2020 to 2021 season featured a Ben Simmons who was defensively dominant in the regular season, but would shrink during the Philadelphia 76ers series versus the Atlanta Hawks during the Eastern Conference semifinals, in which he would famously pass up a wide open lay-in and was legitimately terrified to shoot free throws. Doc Rivers essentially would throw one of his franchise cornerstones under the bus when he was asked if Simmons could be the starting point guard on a championship contending team.
Yeah, David, I don't know that question or the answer to that right now. So I don't know the answer to that.
Ben Simmons would get so rattled from this situation that he would not play for the 76ers again and would cite multiple times throughout the season that he was struggling with mental health. Now, to Daryl Morey's credit, he did do a masterful job completely retooling the Philadelphia 76ers. Trading Al Horford for Danny Green was a stroke of genius that was so brilliant that I literally think it's a top 5 move that was made in the past 2 years. I mean, it completely cleaned up a huge mess. It turned a team that would have potentially been a 5th and 6th seed for years to come to a team that could potentially contend for a championship for years to come. And he continued to clean up mess after mess for the 76ers. I mean, he was able to trade a player that refused to play for the 76ers, whose value was at an all-time low, for James Harden, a deal that originally was perceived to be a pipe dream that wouldn't be on the table until the offseason, which of course brings us to the James Harden portion of the video. And we can't really begin this part without Joel Embiid throwing shade at the man, because he literally came out and said that essentially James Harden is not the player that he used to be. And in my mind, I at least think that he's kind of calling Harden washed here.
Everybody expected Houston James Harden, but that's not who he is anymore.
So we gotta preface this video by saying I am by no means not a James Harden stan. I mean, I grew up in the era of Kobe and Shaq. This duo was being compared to Kobe and Shaq. I mean, I thought it was a lot of fun to watch Joel Embiid and James Harden play basketball together once the trade went down, but obviously they definitely had some things that they needed to work out. Again, I'm not a huge Harden fan, but I don't think players are supposed to fall off this quickly. If we're being dead honest about the Harden trade, in my opinion, it was inevitable that at some point or another, James Harden was going to reunite with Daryl Morey. I mean, he went from a rebuilding Houston Rockets team where he was the focal point of the offense, and the Rockets were consistently just bringing star player after star player after star player to team up with him. If you want a summary of James Harden's Rockets career, they brought in Dwight Howard to team up with him. When he didn't want to play with Dwight Howard anymore, they traded for Chris Paul, although there was a 1-year gap in between. When he felt like Chris Paul was washed, because James Harden became washed quicker than Chris Paul, but I digress, he asked for a trade for Russell Westbrook. When Russell Westbrook didn't work out, he kind of approved a trade for John Wall, but ultimately after that trade, he said, I'm not playing for the Rockets anymore. He showed up to Houston Rockets camp looking overweight and was incredibly toxic as well. He was throwing basketballs in practice at like Jay Sean Tate, and he was hitting strip clubs and publicizing the fact that he was hitting strip clubs, and he would eventually get traded to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, in Brooklyn, he was on a championship contending team, although it had its own drama. Kyrie Irving Irving was in and out of lineups for various reasons. And I don't even want to dive into Kyrie Irving because that's its own separate topic for a completely different day. I mean, currently you even have the Brooklyn Nets saying that they're unsure if they want to bring Kyrie Irving back, and we made a video on that yesterday. And on top of that, James Harden wasn't featured as regularly in the Brooklyn Nets offense. I mean, when you go from being the most prolific isolation scorer in an offense that was tailored around your ability to score in isolation to playing with two other remarkable isolation scorers in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, what did you expect?
I'm not a fan of in terms of winning championships. I don't think that style is ever going to win championships. But at the same time, you have to keep your team's head above water to win games. So you have to do what you have to do to win games, and he's doing that.
As a result, James Harden felt like he could have his cake and eat it too, getting traded to the Philadelphia 76ers, reunited with his general manager that acquired talented pieces to play with him throughout his Houston Rockets tenure, but with a fairly deep roster on top of that. Once again, you have shooters in Danny Green, you have a budding star in Tyrese Maxey, you have the best and most talented big man, not to mention a player that finished second in MVP voting in Joel Embiid, a man that truly wants to win a championship more than any player in the NBA, and I am convinced of that. But let's be honest about James Harden's future with the Philadelphia 76ers, and I'm going to approach this from an objective point of view. You could make an argument that the beginning of the past two seasons didn't necessarily feature the most motivated James Harden, as in the beginning of the 2020 season, he was still on a rebuilding Houston Rockets team, and in the beginning of this past season, I guess you could say that he didn't feel so good about being a member of the Brooklyn Nets because he was dealing with Kyrie Irving vaccine mandate drama, on top of not feeling like he was a good fit for the Brooklyn Nets offense. I don't want to make excuses for the man, I'm just trying to come up with reasonable explanations as to why this man possibly wasn't in the greatest shape over the past 2 years. And even that, I don't think there should be an excuse. If you want to win a championship, you should show up in shape. But again, I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate here. James Harden did show flashes of greatness during this playoff series against the Miami Heat. He put on a masterful display in Game 4, going off for 31 points, and pretty much won that game for the Philadelphia 76ers in the fourth quarter. But in Game 5, he would have 14 points on 5 of 13 shooting and 4 turnovers to 4 assists. And in Game 6, he would have 11 points on 4 of 9 shooting and 9 assists. He would only take 2 shots in the second half of the game, and what's worse is when he was asked what the Miami Heat did to stymie him and take him out of his rhythm, he responded, well, roll the clip.
Nothing.
And then he had the gall to say this.
We ran our offense, the ball, I feel like the ball moved and, it just didn't get back to me.
Like, how did the ball not get back to you if you were the team's point guard? So here's where we currently stand, because I think it's foolish to just sit here and just on the Philadelphia 76ers. It's going to get us nowhere. The fact of the matter is the Philadelphia 76ers are entering a very interesting offseason. I mean, this is an offseason that you could potentially see James Harden hit free agency. You could see Kyrie Irving hitting free agency. A lot of things could happen that aren't necessarily clear. And in the case of James Harden, he's already said that he wants to return for this next season. Obviously, because this is the best situation for him. He's reunited with a general manager that he trusts, and he's in line to get a decent sum of money from a team that is a championship contender. So he said point blank that he will be here next season.
I'll be here. Yeah, I'll be here.
And Philadelphia 76ers fans aren't necessarily the most excited about this. When Harden was asked about his contract option, he said he will be back in Philadelphia and he'll do whatever it takes to allow this team to compete at the highest level moving forward. Bear in mind that Harden is in line for a supermax contract extension. He could get a supermax that pays him $61 million during his age 37 season at the tail end of the supermax contract. And the question now is whether or not the Philadelphia 76ers should give him a supermax contract. Here's the beauty of the James Harden trade, and this is why Sixers fans should be happy that the trade was made. If this trade was not made in the regular season, you would not have a sample size going into the offseason to negotiate a contract extension with James Harden. Just think about it. Be honest with yourself if you're a Sixers fan. Would you be excited about the fact that the Philadelphia 76ers executed a sign and trade, trading Ben Simmons for James Harden in the offseason, and then signed him to a huge contract contract? Probably, and for the most part, I think your team would be significantly weaker as a result of that. But the fact that the trade occurred in the middle of the season gives the Philadelphia 76ers significantly more leverage, as opposed to James Harden's agent being able to make the argument that pairing Harden and Embiid would instantly yield a championship for the 76ers. Now the 76ers could make an argument that there is an adequate sample size of Embiid and Harden playing together, and paying Harden a supermax contract may not make sense for the 76ers. Ultimately, the Sixers have a lot of decisions to make this offseason, so let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.